how the project is performing financially, reviewing the progress through the design process, tracking orders, etc. Now, as always in our Thursday webinars, we're going to be using examples in both Design Manager and Design Manager Professional. So if you'd like to see a report or window in one platform or the other, just ask at one of the question periods and I'd be happy to do so. So the first area I would like to discuss is the tools and methods that are used to monitor order tracking and the overall design progress for projects and their specifications in Design Manager. Now, obviously, there's a lot of overlap in what we will discuss since projects can all be in various stages of the design process, but what I'm going to try to do is follow the general design flow as I recommend and point out features that can be used to assist in each phase of the design process. Now, for our pro attendees, obviously you're familiar with our color-coded item status codes that automatically update as various activities occur for each of the items. Now, I'll go through that entire process in more detail at the end of the webinar so our non-pro attendees can opt out if so desired. So if you have any questions about that, wait till the end and I'll be happy to discuss that entire process in great detail. Okay, so the early stages of the design cycle, of course, involve analyzing the status of proposals or waiting for those proposals to be approved. And shortly after they are approved, you're going to start monitoring the status of the purchase orders for the approved goods and services. So let's go ahead and begin looking at some of the tools that will help us perform those tasks. When it comes to proposing or analyzing proposals, I always recommend the proposal listing report under project management order tracking reports. And remember, we're going to go through a lot of reports today, so if you're jotting down notes or you go to review the webinar when it gets posted on our YouTube channel, you can always add reports that we discuss to your favorites. For instance, if I want to move the proposal listing to my favorite reports, I simply highlight it, click the Add to Favorites, and it'll pop right over there for me. Similarly, in the professional package, we'd go to Reports, Project Management, Order Tracking, Proposal Listing, Add to Favorites, and we see it right here on the right side of that pane. That way you make a nice subset of all the reports that are relevant to yourself so you don't have to hunt through the entire report window to track down the one you're looking for. All right, that being said, our proposal listing report. In Design Manager, as I'm sure you're familiar with, all of the reports have optional ranges that can be entered optionally. If you leave a range, for instance the project range here, blank, that tells Design Manager, hey, include every project. You don't need to put in your first and last project. That's kind of inherent in the range. You only need to enter in information into the ranges if you want to narrow the scope of the report. So I'll leave both of my project range and proposal date range blank. But with this report, we can have an option to show proposals, all of them, without a deposit yet received, and with a deposit received. And both of those, to me, are extremely important. Let's take a look at the has no deposit received. So this is a great report that I could run weekly or monthly to tell myself, okay, well, I've already created these proposals. Why haven't I received the monies yet from the client to begin the work? What's holding up the process? If I'm a small sole proprietor, I've got a very good finger on the pulse of what's going on with each of my proposals or projects in general. But even if I have a design assistant or two, they might be the ones receiving the checks in or talking directly with the client in my absence, and I want to ask throughout the office, hey, what's going on? Why hasn't we received our deposit on the wine cellar? What's holding up that process? Flip it around, if we run our proposal listing with the other option of has a deposit received, these are all the proposals that we have received are checks from the client indicating they're approving on this contract. So now we really need to get down to work. So if I run this version on a very timely basis, I can tell myself, okay, well, the money's in. I need to begin ordering the goods and services that I'm offering to the clients. So I find the proposal listing report extremely helpful to get a real upfront sense of where my projects and proposals are beginning. From here, we can also begin reviewing some of our windows that will help us out through our project status monitoring. One that we'll be going to several times is the status of the project itself. In Design Manager, we access that by editing the project and going to the Status tab. In Professional, we go to our Projects window, select the project in question, and click the Status button along the bottom toolbar. And that brings us to the Project Status window in the Professional platform. The windows are very similar, except that the Professional has a summary page that lists deposits and retainers, client invoicing, and purchasing information that's not shown on the standard version. Let's take a peek here. So this window will tell me lots of information from various aspects of the software. For example, our top grid here is our deposits and retainers. This is showing me all of my proposals that I have received deposits on, and even retainers that I have received as well. So I know just by looking at this tab that I have a proposal out there and I have already received the deposit and even the client's check number for my own reference. If we take a look at the Hilson Pocono home, however, I can look at my status and I can see right away I have no deposits or retainers. So I have a proposal out there. I know I sent it over to the Hilsons, but since I'm looking at this grid, I can tell right away that I don't have the deposit yet received. So it ties right into both aspects of our proposal listing report. Once my proposals do begin to get approved, as in the case of the Carters, I have another tool. Under the proposals, in Design Manager, I have my what we call our information node that quickly shows me the requested amount and even the total deposit received amount. As we can see, our deposit is attached to the proposal in this case, and the information node allows me to see that I've requested $23.40 and indeed received that amount as well. On the Pro platform, that information is listed on our proposals window. I have all that available for me in our grid format, so I can see for the Carter's 2 proposals, not only have I requested my amount, I've received it in this column, and I even have the check information here as well. Both platforms have a window called our proposal status window. I find this window to be a highly underutilized window, and it's a really, really convenient tool. It immediately takes the subset of my items throughout the whole project and allows me to review only the ones that are on the particular proposal. Moreover, it shows me a wealth of information. Besides all of the item descriptions and quantities, etc., I can see the amount of deposit I've requested, what I've received, the client's check number, whether or not the item has been invoiced. For example, in this case, we read right here, 0 out of 4 items are invoiced in full. Items in red are not invoiced or may need to be reviewed. Just by coming into this window and these items jumping out at me in the red type print, I can tell none of them have been invoiced. In fact, we are in the red. Once I invoice them, they'll go to black. For example, if we look at our Carter 1 proposal, we can see that my top 3 items are indeed invoiced already, my sales tax, totals, and I can even see the invoice balance, and they're yet unpaid. So this window tells me very quickly an overall status of just the items on this proposal. If we take a look a little bit deeper, let's take a look at our guest bedroom reference 1. Our item window has a status tab itself, and this information ties perfectly in with what we see on our proposal status. One, we can see that the item was indeed included on this proposal. We received the deposit for it, check number, check date, etc. And if we look down a little farther, we can even see from the item window that it was invoiced on invoice 10,003 for 738, deposit applied, sales tax, 0 payments due, 0 payments, leaving a balance due. That ties in immediately with our proposal status window. So all the information is flowing throughout Design Manager, just depending on how you want to see it or what's the most convenient mechanism, it all is there for you. So again, I really prefer when I'm trying to review a proposal itself that I use the proposal status window. Another handy feature here is once I have invoiced all of my items and received my full payment, so my balance due is 0, I can very quickly mark all of the items as completed. So Design Manager will put them into my completed folders. In Pro, I can likewise set the item status as completed for all of them as well. So I have a lot of extra control on this window that I can use to just work on the items that are on the proposal of my liking. So that's our proposal status window. Now, once time goes on, we're going to begin purchasing all of these goods from our vendors. And that's a whole subset of order tracking. So before I get into that phase, Liz, do we have any questions that I need to answer before going on?
Brad, we do not have any unanswered questions, so I think you're good to move on.
Okay, fantastic. I'll keep going then. So let's take a look. Once my proposal has been approved, I switch my phase over to purchasing. The first report that I tend to use, again, is under our project management, order tracking reports, and it is the unordered components report. Another report that I find is often overlooked by a lot of Design Manager users. What this report is going to tell us is what components throughout Design Manager have yet to be included on a purchase order. And I have my project and proposal range, so I could see if if I've ordered all of my goods for Carter's first proposal or a subset of their proposals. But what I find extremely convenient is the Show Component menu here. I can look at all unordered components. I can also look at those that have been included on a proposal, and my personal favorite is those that are on a proposal and a deposit has been received, because this indicates to me that these are the goods and services that I need to order because my clients already not only approved the proposal, I've received their funds, so I really need to get the ordering process begun. We have the exclude invoiced items options, and that defaults to yes. What that's indicating is generally, if we've already invoiced the client for the good or service, we probably don't need to include it on a purchase order. Why? Well, maybe we had that merchandise sitting in our inventory, or it was from another project that was unapproved, and I had it already at my company. Or it could be for those Design Managers users out there who kind of go off the beaten track and do invoice their client prior to making purchase orders. If you are one of those, you want to use the no option here, so you make sure you catch all of your items. But for the traditional users, we're going to exclude those invoiced items for you. Now let's take a look. So right away, I can see that for the Brigantine Beach Home, all of these goods, I have 2 proposals going on here. I've had them dated, and I've even received the deposit from the client. So I need to get going and get my purchase orders rolling here. So if I run my unordered components report on a timely basis, I always keep top on all of the goods and services that I need to make my purchase orders for, so I don't start falling behind right when the project is getting rolling. So the unordered components report handles that information for me, printed out once a week, timely basis. I know right away what I need to order for the next week or later in the future. Once I have made my purchase orders, that jumps us in to the order tracking information itself. In Design Manager, that's off of our purchase order status button, and it brings us to our purchase order status window. In the professional platform, we go under our project, purchase orders, and we can likewise get to that from our receiving status button here. And once again, you'll notice the two windows between the platforms look very similar. Every company, when I go on a training or I talk to clients of Design Manager, comes to a natural balance of order tracking information. And the balance is between how important is that information going to be in the future when I'm trying to review my tracking versus the time spent to enter it. And every company has to come to that value themselves. And I've seen it all. I've seen certain people might just enter acknowledgement dates and numbers and be fine with it. I've also seen clients that enter every one of the particular variables that we can use to track order tracking. It all depends on, again, the information that you want to be able to pull out from Design Manager versus the time necessary to get that into the software. Our PO status window here, first of all, is one of the mechanisms where we can close purchase orders. Now, Design Managers will close purchase orders automatically for you. And I often get asked, how does it do so? Or why isn't this purchase order closed? Well, you can actually define how Design Manager determines should it be closed or not. And that's done under the Company Information window, Advanced, Purchase Order tab. In the Professional platform, that is located off our General Ledger drop-down, Company Information and Settings, Advanced, Purchase Orders. And the Closed By option tells Design Manager how to close a purchase order automatically. And you have three options. Vendor invoice, which is the most common. What that indicates to Design Manager is when the vendor invoice is recorded for all of the components on a purchase order, automatically close the PO. The next option would be received, and that would tell Design Manager once the received quantity equals the ordered quantity for each component on the PO, close it. That's more manual labor because you have to monitor each component individually rather than just recording the bills from the vendor in the vendor invoice option. The most labor intensive, but perhaps most accurate, is the both option, whereby all of the vendor invoices for each component must be entered and they must be received in full. So that's the most accurate, I guess, in a lot of people's minds, but also the most labor intensive. So you can configure Design Manager to close POs however you'd like using those three options. Back on our PO status window, like I said before, we have our acknowledgement date and number. That's the information the vendor is going to give to you saying, hey, I got the PO, or at least via email or a phone call or whatever, and if they provide an acknowledgement number, you can enter it optionally here. You also have all of your order tracking notes, which can be input and reviewed on nearly every one of our order tracking reports. And most importantly, this is the window where we record the order tracking information per component. So if I wanted to look at our sofa here, I could input the expected ship date. That is when the vendor is telling us it'll be leaving their facility. The receive date, that's when we got it. The CFA date, if you are requiring, if it's a fabric or a trim or a tassel, and you require a cut or cutting for approval, this would be the date that you received it and indeed approved it. The quantity paid for, vendor invoice date, number, and actual cost, they're all here for our reference. We can't enter them here as those come from the vendor invoices recorded in Design Manager. The quantity received is the amount coming in. The quantity back order would be the ordered quantity less the quantity received. We have a status or storage location, just a little free-form text that you can put in for your own information. And we have two, what Design Manager calls user-defined dates. And in my example here, I'm using one of them called our install date. But you can control those dates yourself. So if your company monitors separate dates that are not outside of the scope of Design Manager's 10 or 11 dates that we track, you can customize them yourself. And to do so, that's back under our company information, advanced, general, and it's called our user date 1 and 2. And once you change the date, the title, Design Manager will automatically update it throughout the software. So you really have your own two wildcard dates that your company might use to track information. Another feature from this window that's often overlooked is what we call our Receive All or Change All button. For example, you might have, besides our two components here, say the purchase order has 10 or 11, and inputting each information on each one of those is time-consuming. If they are all received simultaneously, for example, you could use the Change All button and enter in any of the particular dates and information that you might want. A really handy feature would be to use the Receive All items if everything came in at once. That automatically sets my receive date, and it also puts my received quantity to match our ordered quantity. So it's a very rapid way to record order tracking information. Now, many of you are probably familiar with the purchase order status window, but there are a few other places where you can enter in vendor order tracking information that are often overlooked. One of those is on the vendor invoice window itself. So if I was recording an invoice for our Century Furniture PO here, as I'm inputting my costing information, I have all of my optional tracking information here, particularly if the firm has one or two people who handle expediting or data entry or paying the bills, AP work. They're the ones that are going to be monitoring all this stuff coming from the vendors. So while they're putting the bills in, they can also quickly input any tracking information as desired, and that'll flow all the way through to our order tracking window. So since the bill's in your hand and you know right away how many quantities are coming in, the date it's been received, etc., it's very, very convenient to enter it on this window. Another window, of course, is the component window itself. Our special instructions has our CFA required option, but more importantly, our order status information can all be entered here as well. I can put my CFA date in, my delivered information, status location, and here are our wire cards as well. So these dates can be entered on the component window itself, and that will again flow all the way through to the order tracking window. Okay. Now, all of this information is utilized through Design Manager's order tracking reports. And again, as I said when we began this part of the discussion, whatever amount of information works for your company, you'll design that yourself. And just what I always recommend is if there's multiple people in the company, come to a company-wide decision and have everyone adhere to it. It doesn't make that much sense if one employee is entering in all the vendor order tracking information while another employee is entering in only the minimal. It should be a company-wide decision that everyone adheres to. So let's take a look at our order tracking reports. And obviously there's several of them listed here, and with our time constraints, I'll go through some of the ones that I consider the most important. First of all, the open purchase order reports. And again, we discussed how a purchase order can be defined as closed on the company information window, and this report will show us all of those that are currently open. These are the ones that we either have not yet received in full or that we still owe our vendor invoices all on. So we can contact the vendor, and we can even optionally show our vendor contact information, which is extremely convenient, to print the report out and have the numbers of each of the vendors listed for us and their emails if applicable. So we can say, hey, April, why haven't we received the mattress yet? Or John, what's holding us up at Baker Naps and Tubs? So that's this is one of the most widely used of the order tracking reports because we need to see what's holding up the finishing of the order itself. I also adhere and recommend the acknowledgement report. One of the most minor details you could fill in is whether or not the vendor acknowledged the PO at all. If you're not tracking your acknowledgement information, you have no idea if they received it via fax or email or however you might have sent it. So I often run the acknowledgement report, and you can run it in two ways. Show me the components that have not or are without an acknowledgement date, or those with. Those without are the ones that we have included on purchase orders, but I have not yet recorded the acknowledgement. To me, this indicates that I've sent the PO, but the vendor has not responded in turn that they've received it. Likewise, I can run the report with the acknowledgement date. That tells me these are all the ones that the vendor has received, they've acknowledged them, and I can understand that they'll be going through their process shortly thereafter. From there, we can go to the expected ship report. Often, once it's been acknowledged, the vendors may or may not provide you with an expected ship date, indicating when they expect the goods or services to be leaving their facility. So I could run the reports with an expected ship date, which is great to see when I should be expecting them for receiving. So I can tell my my staff or my expediter when it's going to be coming in. Or I could run it without an expected ship date, so I can start calling the vendors and say, listen, when should I expect this? When do I think this will be receiving at my facility? So that's our expected ship date. And you can notice that the reports are very similar in format throughout all of the order tracking reports. From there, we'd go down to our receiving reports, which is going to show us everything that has either not been received or has been received. So if I have not yet received it, again, I can start calling my vendors and say, why hasn't the Annette armchair come in yet? Or where is the Berkeley side table? Or I can run it and say, I've got everything received. Now I can begin dealing with shipping, billing the client, all of those aspects. So both sides of these reports I find to be very, very helpful as I'm monitoring my project status. The flip side of the receiving report is the back order report, which will show me everything with a back order quantity, or even more detailed, things that have a back order quantity and everything that I have not yet received or back ordered and I haven't paid for them, or even a combination thereof. So the back order represents everything that has not have a full receipt quantity yet. And finally, as we were talking about our quote-unquote wildcard dates, if you do have dates that your company likes to track, an install date or a walkthrough or follow-up date, you can use the user-defined date report where you can check which one of the dates you want to use under the date selection and whether or not the date's been filled in or has yet to be filled in, all depending on the exact type of date you are tracking. So the order tracking reports all stem from the purchase order status window, and we also talked about how that a lot of the information could be input not only here, but also on the vendor invoice window while you're entering the bill for convenience, and also on the component itself. And all of that information is completely integrated throughout the software. So after our order tracking has completed, we might want to start monitoring the progress of the project as a whole, and we have tons of mechanisms to do so. One of those, and one of my favorites, is the project order status. Again, we have a few ranges to narrow the scope: project location and proposal range. The exclude completed items option defaults to yes, and that says I only want to focus on the items that are quote-unquote in progress. They're still active, and I'm still waiting for them to go through the entire design cycle. Moreover, there's the in progress items only. That option defaults to no, and what this does is it further narrows it down the scope of the report to show items that have only been included on a PO and not invoiced to the client. So these are things you've ordered but not yet invoiced to the client. And we have two versions, what we call our new or modernized, and we also have our more traditional columnar version of the report. And we'll look at both of them. Let's take a look at the new version first. Now, I like this report because, yes, it's a massive amount of information, but it really does show me everything I could possibly want to see about my project. And it starts with the project itself, groups by location, and then it has my items within the location and their constituent components. So we see our item information, proposal, and then our financial bar shows us our cost, our price, our estimated tax, total estimated to the client, what we requested as a deposit, how much we've even invoiced so far, our payments, which is both deposits and payments on invoices, what I have paid the vendor, and what I owe the vendor in the future. And further, it gives us a net cash flow on each of the items. So right now, my client has given me a $33.60 deposit. I've paid the vendor $2,500 already. I'm going to owe him $27 in the future. So until I recoup the rest of my final payment on the item, I'm going to be looking at a loss in cash of $18.40 until those final payments come in. And the status snapshot even shows me more information, exactly the proposal date, deposit requested, client check number, invoice information, AR balance, etc. And as we move into the component information, we see each of the constituent components, description, their cost, purchase order, order dates, the vendor. A lot of my shipping information is shown for me here, what I pay and owe the vendor, and my vendor invoice information as well. So I find this report one of the ones that I might print out on a Friday, and as I'm reviewing my projects over the weekend, this will tell me everything I could possibly need to know about the overall status and even the financial net income I'm making on each of the items. The professional version even has a step further there. Since a lot of the professional design manager users have many projects simultaneously, we have a version that is just the project summary. And what this does is basically summates our top financial bar for each of the projects. So I can just take a quick snapshot and see my cost, price, what I've invoiced, payments and deposits coming in, what I've spent to the vendors, what my future owe, and my net overall projected cash flow at this point. Now let's take a look at the non-new version, which also I find quite useful. The information on this version of the project status is very similar, just laid out in a different appearance, whereby we have our item information in the first two-thirds, followed by our component information in the final third. So I see my location, the item itself, my estimated prices, deposits coming in, invoicing information, all of which is shown on the item totals down here. So I can see my deposit requested, received, prices, what I've actually invoiced, my payments so far, and you can see how this matches to our our new version precisely. And as we move across, now we see the components again, listed in columns, PO numbers, order dates, and we have what we call our status snapshot, which shows the vendor invoice date, number, whether or not we have open payable, receiving information. So again, you have a wealth of information in as a tight and compact mechanism or display that we can possibly manage. So I find that people use generally one or the other just based on personal preference. I actually find myself using them both depending on what I'm looking for at any given time. But the project order status, either version, do contain all of our component information, i.e. all of our vendor and cost information. So that's not going to be quite appropriate to send to our clients if they're requesting something along those lines. So now we want to flip over to our client status report. This is going to show us information that is customized for the client. So it's going to not include any of our cost, vendor terms, any sensitive information that we receive from the vendor. So I put a client in at the top. I can narrow that down again with a variety of ranges. I can show items that are all of them not completed, completed, or those in progress items that again are defined as on a purchase order, i.e. ordered, and not yet invoiced to the client. One of the most common questions we receive is the calculation here, and there are several. This is going to determine which price, deposit, etc. is shown on the client status report, and there are 4 different options here. There's the highest value. What that does is it's going to compare your estimated price, i.e. the price you type into the specification itself, versus the actual price. What is the actual price? That's the price you truly invoice to the client. And if one is higher than the other, that's the one that will be displayed. For example, if the estimated price was $1,500, but you actually sold it to the client for $1,600 due to a fabric increase or what have you, $1,600 would be shown. If, however, you had a set of 4 chairs that were estimated at $2,500, but you only invoiced half of those for $1,250, the full $25 would show. The next option is estimate. That will always use the price you type into the specification, regardless of whether or not it's been invoiced to the client and regardless of how much it has been invoiced. The other side of that would be the actual. It's always going to use the actual or the price you invoice to the client. So if the item has not been invoiced, it'll show as a 0 under those cases. Finally, you have the estimate if actual is 0 option. That's going to use the estimated price only if there has been no, if you have not invoiced the client at all. What happens in that case is if in our example of the 4 chairs where I invoiced only for 2 of them, I would still show the $1,250 there rather than the full $2,500. So those are the 4 different options, and you can experiment with them to see how they change. Let's take a look at our report here. So first of all, we have we're grouping our items by location. We have our description, proposal information, and I chose the higher of the 2 values, so no matter if my estimated price is higher or lower, I'll always show the higher of the 2. And in those cases, depending on which price I'm showing, if I'm showing my estimated price, if I haven't invoiced the client, then I'll show my received deposit. But if I did invoice the client, this column would be the actual deposit used on the invoice. I then have my balances, and I show my amount paid and the amount due. I also have some relevant order tracking information for the client. They may want to know when things have been ordered, when the expected ship is, and more importantly, when they should be delivered to their facility. What we don't see here, as I said before, is any of the sensitive costing information. This report is designed for the client's eyes and hides all of that. We total each of the locations, and of course then we total the project itself. We do have a few other formats of that. That was our detail by location. Since the client often conceptualizes the work being done at the proposal level, we can do the detail by proposal and location, which will first separate all of the items by proposal. In this case, the time items here have not been proposed. And then we see proposal 1 and the locations contained in proposal 1, and so on with proposal 1 totals and proposal 2 totals. So this way the client can see the information in a way that most is conceptually acceptable to them. Lastly, we can do a further summarized snapshot by using our summary by proposal or location. So the client might not want to see all the minutiae of each of the items, particularly if it's a large project. That client status report could be very long. So if we show them a summary, we break it down first by proposal, and then we show the amounts of each of the locations. So the client can quickly see how things are progressing throughout the conceptual and physical locations within their home. So each of those formats has a definite benefit to it, and they're all used appropriately. But that's the report that we use to send to the client, since it doesn't have all of that component information and vendor information. Next, we're going to move on to analyzing the financial status of our projects, and I can pause for some questions right now, Liz, before I jump into there.
Brad, we don't have any unanswered questions. I think you're good to move forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Okay. Now, as time is progressing, we've been ordering our goods, selling them to the client. We might want to start analyzing the profitability and the financial aspects of the project more rigorously, since a lot of the ordering's already been taken care of. Of course, we can always go back to our project status, and we can see what's been going on. Now, note that my deposit and retainers grid appears to be blank. That's because by default on our status windows, the show open only is checked. That keeps the grid as manageable as possible. But if I want to catch an overall viewpoint, I can uncheck that. And now I see all of the deposits and retainers, whether or not they're open or closed. And again, an closed retainer or deposit is one that has been applied on a client invoice. And as we can see, all of these have been. Down below, we have our 2 invoices that are currently unpaid, since we have an AR balance here. By unchecking the show open only, I can now see my 3rd invoice that has indeed been paid. So this window now becomes a very convenient snapshot where I can see all of my financial transactions so far, and I can even get a very, very convenient snapshot of the project as a whole. Here's all of our gross invoicing, deposits coming in, balance, payments, and our snapshot of our client AR. On the Pro side, it's also very similar. Back to our status. Again, we have the snapshot here, but I have my deposit grid, again blank until I click my Show Open. My invoices as well, where I can show them all. So I find the project status window becomes even more invaluable as time goes on, particularly if I'm receiving questions from the client. Hey, did I pay this invoice yet? Oh yes, you did. Here's the check number. Or I can see to one of my design assistants, why haven't we received payment on this invoice from last November? So the project status window, highly underutilized, but very important as the time goes on and the project gets deeper into its design cycle. Now report-wise, we have several. One of the most popular and probably one of the most important reports in the software is our profit analysis report. This report is going to show us at the item level the profitability of each of our items, both what we estimated and what we truly made on them. Again, we can narrow it down very specifically with our ranges. I might use a sales category range against all projects. For instance, I could use accessories and look at all the accessories I've sold throughout the projects and see how much profitability is there. Or I could put a particular project in, or I could look just at a manager, or even a simple proposal or invoice number. You have several formatting selections. The sort by sales category is the default because most often you want to see how much you're making on a particular classification of goods or services. For instance, wow, we're making tons off of our accessories, so now we can spend a little bit more money on some of the artwork we wanted to. Or, wow, we're really not making the profit we desired on furniture, perhaps we need to address that. But you could also sort by location within a project, manager, even proposal, invoice numbers, or a project summary itself. Let's take a look at the report here, and we'll explain some of the columns. Again, as I said, this is one of the most commonly used reports, and it's one of the ones with the most common questions. So here is all the items within our Carter 01 project, grouped by sales category, and we have all of our cost and pricing columns. And quickly, cost, again, that's the amount the vendor is charging you. Price is the amount you're selling it to the client. Profit is the price less the cost. Gross profit is the profit divided by the price, while markup is the profit divided by the cost. And each design firm prefers one or the other, or some find both of those numbers equally important. So estimate cost and price, that is the amount that you type into the specification. Actual cost comes from the vendor invoices you record for each of the purchase orders. Actual price comes in when you invoice the client. So I often get questions on, well, I don't have any actual price and therefore actual profit, and I can immediately know that probably those items have not yet been invoiced to the client. So this report is fantastic in that we can see our profitability very easily at both the item level and, if we do the project summary, quickly for each project. So this is a nice, particularly for the design staff themselves, to really get a handle on how much you're making at the project level. and even on the items. We have a couple other options here that I find intriguing. For one, you can optionally not include particular types of goods or services. For example, say you always simply pass on your freight charges. If the vendor charges you $150 to ship the chair, you charge $150 to the client. So that somewhat distorts the profitability. You're using that as a pass-through. So if we exclude freight, notice that our profit margins change because we're no longer having that freight in there, so the actual margin is just upon the merchandise itself. So I often tell people, if you don't charge any markup on the freight, or even if it's very minor compared to the markup on the merchandise itself, it's nice to exclude it on this report so you get a better sense of the true profitability of the merchandise you're selling. Another option that I find useful is the below profit percentage. This is a great tool to track or quickly categorize the items that are coming up way below the margin you're expecting. For example, let's put 10% in here. This breaks the report down and is only showing us those with a gross profit margin, notice not markup, but gross profit less than the 10% that we're expecting. So we can sort of take an eye on these and ask, hey, why are we not getting the profit margin we expected? Or are costs too high? Have we not yet invoiced the client in full? So that's a good analytical tool to make sure that we're not making mistakes on particular items. The professional version does have one extra feature there, whereby under the format you can select the sales category summary, which breaks down per project the amount you're making on each of the sales categories, and there's a location version as well. So there's an extra level of detail on the professional version, but the information is exactly the same. So I find that a very one of the most useful reports in the system to really keep your handle on profitability as a project on a whole and narrow it all the way down to the items themselves. If we want to look at cash flow, or how is the project affecting the business as a whole, we have a few other reports. Let's take a look at our project cash flow report. Effectively, this is showing us money coming in and going out for the project, and it breaks it down into 4 main areas, starting with money coming in. So first thing we see are our retainers and deposits. This is all the deposits we're receiving, the transaction numbers, check information, deposits themselves, or retainers. Next would be client invoices and payments. We see an invoice, then we see the payment on the invoice, and we see 2 invoices that have utilized deposit, have a net invoice, and a total balance as they're unpaid. And Design Manager keeps a running balance due on that. So effectively, this number, which we saw before, in fact, is our current AR balance for Carter 1. 1193.70 matches perfectly. The second half is going to be our money going out, and we have our vendor deposits and the checks that pay for them, another deposit. Then we have a running total on all of those and a balance due. And then the invoices themselves to the vendors that show the net invoice amount, the gross invoice amount, any deposit, net invoice, and the balance due here. These CC transactions represent credit card payments. So we have gross, deposit used, net invoice, but since we paid with the credit card, we don't have a second check line to indicate. So there's no running balance here. And then we have a total of the accounts payable so far, and even a subsection to catch miscellaneous project-related expenses. But I often simply use the summary in the top, where it shows money coming in from deposits, payments on invoices, deposits going out, invoices going out, and payments I made on my credit card. So I can quickly see the project's effect on my cash flow. Even if I have a wealth of money in my cash balance, by monitoring the cash flow analysis for large projects or even small ones, I can see how one project may be draining my funds by me paying out a lot but not yet getting enough retainer deposits or invoice payments on, so I can kind of work the clients to give me some more money or make their payments on invoices, or I can start pulling back on my expenditures with the vendor. Lastly, we have our project profit and loss. This report allows us to create a miniature income statement or profit and loss statement for each project. So it shows me at the raw account level which accounts I've been accruing my revenue or sales for my client invoices, my purchases from the vendor or my cost of goods. That gives me a gross profit, and then any expenses that I've associated with the project can be listed here. So now I'm taking the analysis of the project away from the items and looking at the raw accounting data. And this becomes a wonderful report to quickly see the net effect on the project on my overall net income on my company as a whole. So we really have several reports that display the information in a variety of different mechanisms depending on what we're looking for at a given time. So that being said, there's a multitude of ways in Design Manager to monitor the status of the project, either from the orders, from the proposals, from the purchase orders, or as we just went through, a myriad of ways to analyze the profitability of the projects and track the status of it financially. So I can now pause for some more questions, and then I can go into the professional status codes.
Hey Brad, we have answered all the questions up to this point, so I think you're good to move forward.
Okay, thanks Liz. All right, for our professional attendees, obviously you are familiar with the status codes in Design Manager, and they're color-coded, and you've noticed that they progress naturally throughout the design process depending on various activities that occur to them within the software. What we often get questions on are why, or how can I configure these? And Design Manager allows you to configure them however you choose depending on your business model. That's all done under our General Ledger, Company Information, Item Status. And here is our Design Manager default group of status codes, in that we have specifying, awaiting client approval, need to order, etc. You can customize this though, or you can even customize how each of these is defined. For example, if we edit our specifying, we come to this item status type window. I can change my color, and I can set my text color to match or be more dramatic. I can tell Design Manager, hey, when you get to this status, what should happen? Remain active, automatically go to be completed, or automatically go to inactive. And then the most important things are defined. The set when, and you have two sets that can be configured. And there's a lot of options in here. when a new item is created, when a proposal is issued, when you got a deposit from the vendor, purchase order is issued, vendor deposit is sent, etc. And that can be combined to happen either with another set of conditions using the logical AND, or you could say I want it to go to the new type when either of the two conditions is experienced using the OR option. And further, you have a whole variety of additional functions. For example, the locked option will say that as soon as it hits the status, it's going to remain there. No matter what happens in Design Manager, it's going to stay there until a user comes and moves it along. That's a wonderful tool if there might be a controller or a purchasing manager that, say, wants to review all of the POs before they have deposits sent. So they could use the ordered option here, which gets configured when a PO is issued, and if it's locked, it's going to remain there. The controller can then review it and move it to the next phase. You also have a password protect option, which it works in conjunction with one of the Design Manager password attributes, meaning that a user who has that attribute locked can't manually change it. Because I can manually change my statuses from here on the specification window and even on the status window itself. If it's in the locked condition, however, the password protect condition, it cannot do so. And lastly, you have the lock purchasing, another very handy tool in larger firms, whereby once it hits that status, new purchase orders cannot be created. For example, perhaps when a deposit is received, as in the need to order status type, you might lock it here. So now, again, a controller can come review all the proposals that have received deposit, and then allocate which ones should move forward into making purchase orders. So you have full control over how all of these status codes are utilized, and again, depending on what conditions are important to your company, you can customize it to make it work just the way that works for you. And you also have many of your reports, such as project order status, can be used just for those types of item status codes. So Design Manager on the professional platform takes the analyzing of a status to a whole new automated level that you can further customize and then utilize with in conjunction with a lot of the reports. So take, I tell people to take a look at the glossary listings, status codes, which tells exactly how each one of these status codes get allocated, or how an item proceeds to each one of the status codes. Review this with yourself or with the rest of the company and see, hey, what do we need to customize to make this work precisely the way we want it to? Because then a lot of the manual status information professional users don't need to worry about, because you have these automated status codes. So that sums up the status code work, Liz. Are there any questions on that before we conclude?
Brad, we are good, so I think we can conclude here.
Okay, I didn't catch the last of that, Liz, but if there are no questions, I thank everyone for hanging with us. This is one of our longer webinars today, and I hope it was informative, and I hope to see you again on a Thursday in the future.
Thank you, Brad, and thanks again to everyone participating today. We are going to end things here, but we invite you to email support@designmanager.com with any other questions you have about the software. We hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. If you would like to join us for next week's webinar, 5 monthly reports to run and review, please visit www.designmanager.com to register. Thank you, and have a great afternoon.